It was considered fitting that any exploration of Hermetic symbolism should begin with an account of the symbols and attributes of the Saitic Isis, the Isis of Sais, famed for the inscription said to have adorned the front of her temple. "I am Isis, I am all that has been, that is, or shall be. No mortal has ever unveiled me." According to Plutarch, many ancient writers believed this goddess to be the daughter of Hermes, while others claimed she was the child of Prometheus. Both figures were celebrated for their divine wisdom, and her connection to them may have been purely allegorical. Plutarch himself interpreted the name Isis as meaning wisdom. Godfrey Higgins, in Anacalypsis, traced the name to the Hebrew ISO and the Greek Zu, meaning to save. Some scholars, such as Richard Payne Knight in the symbolical language of ancient art and mythology, argued instead for a northern origin, possibly Scandinavian or Gothic, where the name appeared as Isa, signifying ice, or water in its most inert and crystallized form. Across the ancient world, under countless titles, this Egyptian deity was seen as the personification of natural fecundity. She was known as the goddess of 10,000 names and, in Christian tradition, was transformed into the figure of the Virgin Mary. Legends held that although she gave birth to all living things, including the sun, she remained ever a virgin. In the Golden Ass, Apuleius records a declaration attributed to the goddess, in which she proclaims herself as nature, mother of all things, queen of the elements, ruler of the dead, foremost of the celestial beings, and the eternal likeness of all gods and goddesses. She claims dominion over the heavens, the sea, and the underworld, receiving worship under many guises, as Pessinuntica among the Phrygians, Minerva among the Athenians, Venus in Cyprus, Diana in Crete, Proserpine in Sicily, and Ceres at Eleusis. Others called her Juno, Bellona, Hecate, or Rhamnuja. Yet, she said, those who recognized her truest form, such as the Egyptians, Ethiopians, and Aerie, called her by her proper name, Queen Isis. Le Plongeon proposed that the Egyptian myth of Isis might have a historical root in the civilization of the Mayas of Central America, where she was known as Queen Mu. In this account, Prince Ko was her brother-husband, a counterpart to Osiris. Following his murder, Queen Mu supposedly fled from her enemies and took refuge in Egyptian Maya colonies, where she became their queen and was known as Isis. Yet, even if such a historical figure existed, her importance would pale beside that of the allegorical world virgin, whose presence in so many different cultures suggests that she was less a mortal woman than a universal and symbolic archetype. Sextus Empiricus recorded the claim that the Trojan War was fought not for a mortal woman, but for a statue of the moon goddess. This lunar Helena was the true object over which Greeks and Trojans contended at the gates of Troy. Various writers have sought to show that Isis, Osiris, Typhon, Nephthys, and Aruris, also called Thoth or Mercury, were descendants of the patriarch Noah through his son Ham. Yet, since the tale of Noah and his ark is itself a cosmic allegory describing the renewal of worlds and the repopulation of planets at the dawn of each new cycle, such attempts only weaken the idea that these figures were historical individuals. Robert Flood taught that the sun embodies three properties: life, light, and heat, which in turn quicken the three planes of existence: spiritual, intellectual, and material. The phrase, "from one light, three lights," was interpreted to refer to these, and in Masonic tradition, to the first three master masons. In this view, Osiris represents the third and material aspect of solar power, the life-giving influence that animates the Earth's plants and animals. He is not the sun itself, but the sun serves as the emblem of that vital force in nature which the ancients personified as Osiris. His emblem, the opened eye, honored the sun as the great eye of the universe. Against this active, fiery, and life-imparting force stood the passive and receptive principle of nature. Modern science has shown that everything, from atoms to solar systems, is organized around radiant, positive centers, surrounded by negative bodies sustained by the emanations of the central life. This mirrors the allegory of Solomon and his many wives, in which Solomon is the sun, and his wives and concubines are the planets, moons, asteroids, and other receptive bodies within the solar house. In this symbolism, Isis, identified in the Song of Solomon with the dark maid of Jerusalem, represents receptive nature, the watery and maternal source that brings forth all life once quickened by the sun's generative power. In antiquity, the year was counted as 360 days, with 5 additional days set apart by the god of cosmic intelligence to mark the births of 5 deities called the children of Ham. Osiris was said to have been born on the first of these days, Isis on the fourth, a number symbolically linked to the earth and its elements. Typhon, the adversarial spirit or demon of Egyptian lore, was born on the third. Often shown as a crocodile or as a creature combining crocodile and hog, Typhon, according to Plutarch, bears a name meaning insolence and pride, qualities that, along with self-centeredness, stand as the enemies of wisdom and truth, which Isis personifies. Once Osiris, symbolizing the sun, had become king of Egypt and bestowed upon his people the full blessings of his intellectual light. He journeyed through the heavens, enlightening other nations. The Greeks, Plutarch says, honored him under the names Dionysus and Bacchus. But during his absence, his brother Typhon, the malevolent counterpart to the Scandinavian Loki, devised a plot to destroy him. With 72 co-conspirators, he had a richly adorned chest crafted to match Osiris's body exactly. At a banquet of gods and goddesses, Typhon displayed this chest, promising to gift it to whoever fit it perfectly. One by one they tried and failed, until Osiris lay down within it. In that instant, Typhon and his allies fastened the lid, sealed it with molten lead, and cast it into the Nile, where it drifted to the sea. Plutarch records that this took place when the sun was in Scorpio, the sign of treachery, and on the same seasonal point at which Noah is said to have entered the ark to escape the great flood. Plutarch related that the Pans and Satyrs, the spirits of nature and the elementals, were the first to discover that Osiris had been slain. They immediately raised an outcry, and from this event arose the term panic, signifying the sudden fear or astonishment that seizes multitudes. When Isis learned of her husband's fate from children who had witnessed the conspirators carrying away the chest, she clothed herself in mourning and set out in search of him. In time, she found that the chest had drifted to the coast of Byblos, where it had become lodged within the branches of a tree. This tree, in a marvel of growth, enclosed the box entirely within its trunk. The king of that land, amazed by this wonder, ordered the tree to be felled, and from its wood a pillar was fashioned to support the roof of his palace. Journeying to Byblos, Isis recovered the body of Osiris, only for Typhon to steal it once more. This time he cut it into many pieces and scattered them across the earth. In her grief, Isis searched for and gathered nearly all the fragments, but one part, the phallus, had fallen into the Nile and been swallowed by a fish. She replaced it with a replica made of gold. Typhon was later defeated and slain by the son of Osiris. Among some Egyptians, it was believed that the souls of the gods ascended to the heavens to shine as stars, with Isis identified with the dog star and Typhon with the constellation of the bear, though this belief may never have been universally held. In Egyptian art, Isis is often shown wearing a headdress shaped like the empty throne of her slain husband, which in certain dynasties became her hieroglyphic emblem. Egyptian headgear carried deep symbolic meaning, representing the auric radiance of divine intelligences, much like the nimbus or halo in Christian imagery. Frank C. Higgins, a Masonic symbolist, observed that the elaborate crowns of some gods and pharaohs were tilted backward at the same angle as the Earth's axis. The garments, ornaments, and regalia of ancient initiates symbolized the spiritual forces emanating from the human form. Modern science has begun to rediscover these hermetic principles, including the method of discerning a person's mental development, soul nature, and physical condition through the semi-visible streams of electric force that continually pass through the skin, described in detail by Dr. Walter J. Kilner in The Human Atmosphere. Isis was at times represented by the head of a cow, or by the whole animal, recalling the Scandinavian mother cow Audhumla, who licked the first gods from the ice and symbolized the nourishing and fertile power of nature through her milk. She was also depicted as a bird, and often bore in one hand the crux ansata, the emblem of eternal life, and in the other a flowered scepter, the sign of her authority. Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, revered as the founder of Egyptian wisdom and the sage of the ancient world, was said to have entrusted to the priests and philosophers of old the profound secrets preserved to this day in myth and legend. Cloaked in allegories and symbolic figures, these teachings concealed the hidden formulas for spiritual, mental, moral, and physical regeneration, what came to be known as the mystic chemistry of the soul, or alchemy. Such lofty truths were imparted only to the initiates of the mystery schools, while the uninitiated, unable to grasp their abstract meaning, revered the sculpted images that outwardly represented these concealed principles. The very essence of Egyptian wisdom and secrecy was embodied in the Sphinx, which for countless generations has kept its silence before those who sought its hidden meaning. Within Hermeticism, the timeless spiritual truths, veiled from the world by its own ignorance, and the keys to the doctrines of the ancient philosophers, were symbolized in the figure of the Virgin Isis. Hidden beneath her veil, revealing her mysteries only to the worthy few who had earned the right to approach, remove the covering from nature's form, and behold the divine reality face to face. The interpretations given here for the symbols associated with the Virgin Isis are drawn, unless otherwise stated, from a free rendering of the fourth book of the Bibliothèque de Philosophes Hermétiques, titled The Hermetical Signification of the Symbols and Attributes of Isis, with additional explanations offered to expand and clarify the material. Images of Isis were adorned with symbols of the sun, moon, and stars, as well as emblems of the earth, over which she was thought to preside as the personification and guardian spirit of nature. Surviving statues still bear the marks of her dignity and authority. The philosophers of antiquity regarded her as the embodiment of universal nature, the mother of all creation. She was most often depicted as a partly unclothed woman, sometimes pregnant, sometimes draped in a garment of green or black, or in a robe woven from four mingled colors: black, white, yellow, and red. Apuleius gives a vivid description of her appearance. Her long, flowing hair, curling in natural locks, fell loosely upon her divine neck. A many-shaped crown of various flowers crowned her head, and at its center, upon her brow, was a smooth, luminous disk, like a mirror or radiant white light, signifying the moon. On either side of this were upright serpents, and above them ears of wheat. Her robe, woven from the finest flax, shimmered with changing hues, at times a bright white, at times golden like saffron, and at times glowing with a rosy light. Most striking of all was a black garment, lustrous with a dark radiance, which wrapped beneath her right side, rose across her left shoulder, and swelled outward like the boss of a shield, falling in graceful folds with fringed ends. Across its surface and border glittered embroidered stars, and in the midst of these shone the full moon, sending forth fiery rays. Around the edge of this robe, fixed in unbroken unity, was a garland of flowers and fruits of every kind, moving with her as she did. In her right hand she held a bronze sistrum, its narrow frame crossed by rods that, when shaken, produced a clear triple tone. In her left she bore an elongated vessel shaped like a boat, upon the handle of which a snake raised its head and swelling neck. Upon her immortal feet were sandals woven from the leaves of the palm, the emblem of victory. The green of Isis's robe was said to symbolize the living vegetation that blankets the earth, representing the garment of nature itself. Black signified death and decay, which in turn lead to renewal and the birth of new life. In Hermetic philosophy, the colors white, yellow, and red were seen as the principal hues of the alchemical universal medicine, appearing after the black stage of putrefaction had passed. Among the ancients, the name Isis was also applied to one of their secret medicinal preparations, linking her image to the science of chemistry. Her black drapery further denoted the moon, described in alchemical terms as the lunar humidity, the Sophic universal mercury, and the active substance of nature, which possesses no light or vital force of its own but receives them from the sun. In this sense, Isis stood as the emblem of the great work of the wise, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the universal medicine. The symbols associated with her were numerous, for Egyptian Hermetists often used their emblems interchangeably. She was sometimes shown wearing a headdress of cypress branches, signifying mourning for her slain husband and, more broadly, for the physical death that she brings to all creatures so that life might renew itself in successive generations. At other times her head was adorned with a golden crown or a wreath of olive leaves, marking her as queen of the world and mistress of the universe. The golden crown also represented the aurific unctuosity, the sulphurous vitality of the solar fire, which she distributed to all beings through the ceaseless circulation of the elements, symbolized by the sistrum she carried, an instrument also considered a yonic emblem of purity. A serpent woven among the olive leaves and swallowing its own tail expressed the truth that even the solar vitality is tainted by the corruption of the earth and must be cleansed through the 7 planetary circulations, known to alchemists as the flying eagles, before it becomes a medicine capable of restoring health. This doctrine also regarded the sun's emanations as a healing power. The 7-fold purification was mirrored in sacred processions, the Masonic Lodge circumambulations, the priests of Israel circling Jericho, and the pilgrims' 7-fold walk around the Kaaba in Mecca. From the golden crown sprang 3 horns of plenty, emblematic of nature's abundance flowing from a single source rooted in the heavens, the head of Isis. In this form, ancient natural philosophers represented the vital forces of the 3 kingdoms of sublunary nature, mineral, plant, and animal, including humankind. The moon was placed at one of her ears and the sun at the other, showing that these 2 luminaries were the passive and active principles, mother and father, of all earthly life, through which nature transmits her powers to every realm. Upon the back of her neck were inscribed the signs of the planets and the zodiac, symbols of the celestial influences guiding the destinies and formative powers of all things, shaping every earthly body as a microcosm of the greater universe. In her right hand, Isis held a small sailing vessel whose mast was fashioned from the spindle of a spinning wheel. At the mast's summit rested a water jar, its handle in the form of a serpent with a swollen neck. This symbolized her as the pilot of the bark of life, steering it through the troubled seas of time. The spindle signified her role in spinning and cutting the thread of existence. These emblems also conveyed her abundance of humidity, by which she nourishes all natural bodies, shielding them from the sun's heat with life-giving moisture drawn from the atmosphere. This moisture sustains vegetation, yet it is invariably touched by the venom of decay and must be purified through the invisible cleansing fire of nature. This hidden fire digests, refines, and renews the substance so that the humidity may become the universal medicine, able to heal and restore all living forms. The serpent, which renews itself by casting off its skin, serves as a symbol of spiritual resurrection emerging from the confines of material existence. This same renewal is reflected each spring, when the life-giving power of the sun returns to the lands of the northern hemisphere. The symbolic Virgin is depicted holding in her left hand a sistrum and a cymbal, the latter being a square frame of metal that, when struck, produces the keynote of nature, signifying her role in maintaining harmony. At times she also bears an olive branch, representing the peace and balance she sustains among all living things through her regenerative power. By means of decay and transformation, she brings forth countless forms of life in an endless cycle of change. The symbol's square shape, rather than the usual triangular form, reflects the principle that all creation is renewed in accordance with the harmony of the 4 elements. According to Dr. Sigismund Backstrom, if a physician could unite the elements of earth, fire, air, and water into a single perfected substance, symbolized by the 6-pointed star or the interlaced triangles of the philosopher's stone, he would hold the key to curing all illness. Backstrom affirmed his conviction that the universal fire or spirit of nature does all and is all in all, through attraction, repulsion, motion, heat, sublimation, evaporation, drying, thickening, coagulation, and fixation. This universal spirit shapes matter and manifests throughout creation. Whoever comprehends these processes and applies them to the 3 realms of nature may be called a true philosopher. From the right breast of Isis springs a cluster of grapes, while from the left emerges a golden ear of corn or sheaf of wheat. These signify nature as the ultimate provider, nourishing plant, animal, and human life alike. The golden hue of the wheat reveals that within sunlight, spiritual gold, lies the primordial seed of all existence. Around the upper body of the statue is fastened a girdle adorned with mysterious emblems. 4 golden plates, arranged in a square at the front, represent the 4 elements: life, light, heat, and force, from which the quintessence of all things is generated. Scattered stars upon the girdle illustrate the influence of celestial forces in darkness, just as the sun exerts its power in light. Isis is identified with the Virgin of the constellation Virgo, portrayed with a serpent beneath her feet, a crown of stars upon her head, and often bearing in her arms a sheaf of grain or the young sun god. The statue rests upon a dark stone pedestal decorated with ram's heads, while her feet press upon venomous serpents. The ram's heads signify that the most favorable season for the generation of life occurs when the sun is in the sign of Aries. The serpents beneath her feet express nature's ability to preserve life and restore health by driving away impurities and corruption, while her dominion over reptiles reflects her power to cleanse all corrosive and poisonous elements from living bodies. The ancient philosophers affirmed certain axioms: nature contains nature, delights in her own nature, overcomes nature, and cannot be altered except through herself. In contemplating the statue of Isis, one must keep in mind the hidden meaning of its allegories, for without this awareness the Virgin becomes an unfathomable mystery. From a golden ring upon her left arm descends a cord bearing a deep vessel filled with flaming coals and incense. Isis, the personification of nature, bears the sacred fire, preserved with reverence and kept burning in a consecrated temple by Vestal attendants. This fire is the immortal flame of nature, ethereal, essential, the source of life itself. The incorruptible oil, the balm of life so often praised by the wise and referenced in sacred writings, is symbolically the fuel of this eternal flame. From her right arm hangs a thread supporting a pair of scales, representing the perfect balance of nature in all her measures. Isis is often depicted as the embodiment of justice, for nature is constant and unfailing. The World Virgin is sometimes placed between 2 great pillars, akin to the Jachin and Boaz of the Mysteries, signifying that nature achieves fertility through polarity. As wisdom personified, she stands between opposites, showing that true understanding resides at the point of balance, and that truth itself is often caught between the seeming contradictions of opposing forces. The golden glimmer in her dark hair shows that while lunar in nature, her power is drawn from the sun's rays, which give her a warm, radiant glow. As the moon is clothed in reflected sunlight, so Isis, like the Virgin of prophecy, is adorned in the brilliance of solar light. Apuleius wrote of seeing the revered goddess rise from the ocean in a dream, recalling the belief that life first emerged from the waters, a view modern science has echoed. The ancients held that universal life began in warm vapor, moist yet fiery, and the veiled Isis, her covering suggesting vapor, symbolizes this humid medium that carries the life-giving seed of the sun, represented by a child in her arms. Since the sun, moon, and stars appear to sink into the sea, and their rays are received by its depths, the ocean was seen as the womb of living things, where celestial influences unite to create life. For this reason, Isis is sometimes portrayed as pregnant. Beside the statue often stood the figure of a black and white ox, symbolizing Osiris as the zodiacal bull or apis, sacred to Osiris for its distinctive markings. Among the Egyptians, the bull was a creature of labor, reminding all of the tireless work of nature to sustain life and health. Frequently, Harpocrates, the god of silence, stands near Isis, finger to lips, warning that the sacred mysteries must be kept from the unworthy. In the lands of Britain and Gaul, the Druids understood the mysteries of Isis and honored her under the symbol of the moon. Some have mistaken Isis for the moon itself, yet the moon was chosen for its rule over the waters. To the Druids, the sun was the father and the moon the mother of all life, and through these emblems they gave reverence to universal nature. The image of Isis has often been used as a symbol of the hidden and magical arts, encompassing practices such as necromancy, invocation, sorcery, and the working of wonders. In one of her myths, she is said to have compelled Ra, the invincible god of eternity, to reveal his sacred and secret name. This name held the same significance as the lost word in Masonry, for with it a magician could command the obedience of unseen and higher powers. The priests devoted to Isis were masters in applying the hidden forces of nature, possessing knowledge of hypnotism, mesmerism, and related arts long before such practices were recognized in the modern age. Plutarch described the qualities required of a true follower of Isis, noting that outward appearances, such as the cutting of hair or the wearing of certain garments, did not make a devotee. The true servant of the goddess was the one who, having learned the stories of the gods in the right way, sought out the hidden meanings concealed within them and examined all through the lens of reason and philosophy. In the Middle Ages, the troubadours of Central Europe preserved tales of the Egyptian goddess in their songs, composing verses in praise of the most beautiful woman in existence. Her true identity was rarely known, yet she was Sophia, the Virgin of Wisdom, pursued by philosophers throughout the ages. To the ancients, Isis embodied the mystery of motherhood, seen as the most tangible proof of nature's infinite wisdom and divine guidance. To the seeker of today, she stands as the very image of the great unknown, whose mysteries of life, death, creation, and renewal are revealed only to those who dare to lift her veil. Servius, in his commentary on Virgil's Aeneid, noted that the wise Egyptians preserved their dead through embalming and placed the bodies in catacombs so that the soul might remain in connection with the body for a long time and not be quickly estranged from it. The Romans, on the other hand, chose the funeral pyre, intending for the vital spark to be swiftly released and restored to the universal element, returning to its original state. Although no complete records survive revealing the Egyptian secret doctrine regarding the link between the spirit, or consciousness, and the body it inhabited, it is considered likely that Pythagoras, initiated in Egyptian temples, reflected at least part of their teachings when he later taught the doctrine of metempsychosis. The common belief that Egyptians embalmed the dead to preserve them for a physical resurrection does not align with modern understanding of their philosophy of death. Porphyry, in On Abstinence from Animal Food, described an Egyptian custom of removing the abdominal organs of the dead, placing them in a separate chest, and performing rites of purification. He recorded an oration, translated by Euphantus, in which the deceased appealed to the sun and the gods of life to receive the soul, declaring a life of piety, honor toward parents, and freedom from acts of murder or fraud. If any error had been committed in consuming forbidden food or drink, the fault was attributed not to the self, but to the organs now removed, symbolically freeing the body from their influence. Early Christians, taking their scriptures in a literal sense, also sought to preserve the bodies of the dead, immersing them in salt water so that on the day of resurrection the spirit might re-enter an intact and unspoiled form. Rejecting embalming and the removal of organs, believing these would prevent the spirit's return, they buried the dead whole, unlike the Egyptians who practiced elaborate mummification. In Egyptian Magic, SSDD by Florence Farr, it is suggested that mummification may have been reserved for those who had attained a degree of initiation. To the Egyptians, it is argued, embalming prevented reincarnation, which was necessary only for imperfect souls who had failed the tests of initiation. Those capable of entering the secret adytum had little need for the liberation of the soul through bodily destruction. The preserved body of such an initiate could serve as a talisman or physical anchor for the soul's manifestation on earth. In its earliest form, the practice of mummification was restricted to the pharaoh and certain members of the royal house, believed to share in the divine attributes of Osiris, the great mummified ruler of the Egyptian underworld. Osiris is often shown with the lower part of his body enclosed in a mummy case or bound in funeral wrappings. According to Egyptian belief, the spirit of man was made up of 3 distinct parts, only one of which took on a physical form. The human body was regarded as a tomb for this incarnating spirit. Osiris, as a symbol of the incarnating ego, was therefore depicted with his lower body mummified, signifying the living spirit confined within the material form, represented by the mummy case. In Egyptian thought, there is a union between the active principle of God and the passive principle of nature, and from this union comes rational creation. Man is a composite being from the active divine principle, the Father. He inherits his divine spirit, the flame of aspiration, the immortal essence that endures beyond the dissolution or renewal of the mortal frame. From the passive natural principle, the mother. He inherits his body, subject to the laws of nature, along with his humanity, mortal self, desires, emotions, and appetites. Osiris was also believed to embody the Nile, while Isis, his sister and wife, represented the surrounding land, which yielded abundance when nourished by the river's flood. The dark waters of the Nile were thought to explain the blackness of Osiris, who was commonly portrayed with an ebony complexion.